What do you think is magic about Minot?
There's literally something for everyone.
Checking out a local restaurant.
Baseball.
Walking into a small business and visiting with the shop owner.
I think Minot's community-minded businesses make it magic.
Be thrilled.
Rediscover.
Experience.
With the magic in Minot.
How the community rallies around the Minot Air Force Base members and spouses that come to work in the Magic City.
Get involved!
The support.
Be part of the magic in Minot.
We can do anything.
Come and see.
The residents that make Minot magic, and that's what I love about Minot.
Go Minot!
The recreation.
The zoo!
The community.
The magic of discovery.
This community promotes literacy. It is the energy!
You know what makes Minot magic to me? It's our downtown.
I believe Mesa really puts the magic in Minot.
Opportunity.
The culture.
The generosity and the unyielding friendliness.
The way our community comes together.
Be a part of the magic in Minot.
Hey Minot, 2020 is the year for more. Yes, it's the U.S. Census season, and with it, Minot could see more. More opportunities for business. More federal funding for roads, for our schools, and for our community. Take part in something more. Take the census. Because for us, more means more. Visit minotnd.org to learn more. This dumpster has a very important role for our community. To extend the lifetime of our landfill and also limit methane gas from leaking into our air and into the community. But for that to happen, there's only one simple rule that needs to be followed. Dump only leaves and grass. This is why compost sites only take grass and leaves. When compost is dumped here, it's then brought here. And in just a few weeks, it will go here. A 6 to 8 week process to create clean, nutrient-rich, and free topsoil.
Now, separating this organic material from your household trash will actually leave more space for real trash when it goes to the landfill.
It also reduces methane gas at our dump site, which is a significant contributor to greenhouse gases. But recently, there has been an issue with our composting process. Trash. We've seen just about everything unloaded. This. And oh, come on, guys. Making compost isn't complicated, but it is a long process. Grass and leaves are dumped into windrows. They're turned once or maybe twice a week, which aerates the material, reducing the fermentation that actually causes methane gas. Eventually, Mother Nature produces her final product. But if that compost is littered with junk, it costs you money. Because trees, trash, and whatever else may lie in those rows has to be hand-picked out.
That's not going to compost down.
And is oftentimes missed, causing damage to equipment or littered compost soil. So save us the time and taxpayer money. Heed the warnings. Let this dumpster do its job for the community and only dump grass and leaves.
We'll go ahead and call the meeting of the Minot City Council to order for today, Monday, August 17th, 2020. It is 5:30 in the afternoon. I would remind everyone in the audience to please either put their phones or electronic devices on vibrate or silent so we can keep the distractions down to a minimum. And also say thank you to everyone who is attending this afternoon, either in person or via social media. And just a side note as well, we do have a number of staff members that are down in the training conference room watching this through Teams. So if we do have some questions later on in the budget, that they will be able to either answer in that manner or come up to the council chambers in person to answer. Roll call, please.
Evans. Here. Janser.
Here.
Olson. Here. Pittner.
Here.
Padragula.
Here.
Ross.
Here.
Sitma.
Here. Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Number 3 on our agenda this afternoon is consider the report of the Planning Commission. We had 4 separate items. 2 of them are a public hearing. I would look to see if the council wants to take the other 2 items individually or on consent. Oh, I'm sorry. Yep, I've already forgotten. Alderman Olson, we did have a consideration for moving one of our items ahead in our schedule this afternoon. Alderwoman Olson.
Yes, Mr. Mayor. I would move that we move item 5.1 to this point in the agenda.
For the folks at home, 5.1 is the bond resolution for 2020A, 2020C, at the request of staff for the 3 different bonds that were heard today. We have a motion to move up 5.1 on the agenda. Is there a second? Second by Alderwoman Evans. Any discussion on the motion? Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, please call the roll.
Olson.
Yes.
Pittner.
Yes.
Padragula.
Yes.
Ross.
Yes.
Sitma.
Yes.
Evans. Janser.
Yes.
Motion is approved, so let's jump briefly to 5.1 here. That is the 2020 bond resolutions for 2020A through 2020C. The bonds being issued by the city are going to be listed for sale and require the resolution to be signed in order to authorize that sale. The recommendations to City Council is to authorize the mayor to sign 2020A refunding bonds, 2020B sales tax revenue bonds, and 2020C airport revenue defunding bonds resolutions for the construction of Storm Sewer District number 123, the continuation of flood control, and for refinancing of the airport revenue bond series 2013D and 2014D. We are being asked to take each one of these individually for consideration, but first maybe Mr. Lakefield can give us a brief recap on kind of the deeper high-level details of how this went today.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, the Finance Department has been working with our bond attorneys and financial advisors on these 3 issuances. 2 of them are new issuances of debt, and the third one is the refunding, advanced refunding issue for existing debt that the airport has. The anticipation was that there would be a cost savings on those refunding issues to reduce the amount of interest that we're paying on them. We have been somewhat aggressive in the last year, retiring bond issues early if they had higher rates of interest, and exploring other opportunities to save some cash. We went through the bond rating call here a week or so ago, and we were happy with the outcome. The city's general obligation debt was rated at AA2, which is the highest that we can get for a city our size. The airport refunding issue was also rated AA2, and the sales tax revenue bonds, which are the flood control bonds, were rated AA3. So we're very happy with the outcome from Moody's on the ratings. The bond sale was held today, and we had some very good results on those. The special assessment bonds, I believe, were 0.76% interest rate. The refunding issue for the airport was around 1.45%. And the flood control bonds came in at 30-year term at just under 2%. So the timing, we were lucky. I think things worked in our favor here a little bit, and the timing was good for us, but there was a lot of work put in by finance staff to make this all happen too.
Thank you, Mr. Lakefield. Again, I want to say thank you to you and the rest of the finance staff for also seeing this and getting this out and kind of hitting the perfect sweet spot by the appearance here on all of the different ratings and terms. So first, let's go ahead and take a look at Series 2020A bond, the $1.44 million. I would look for a motion on that.
Move approval.
Motion by Alderwoman Olson for approval. Is there a second? Second by Alderwoman Evans. Any discussion on the motion? Any discussion on the motion? Alderman Pittner.
Thank you, Mayor. Maybe a question for Finance Director Lakefield, if you want to wear that hat. Dave, just out of curiosity, what were we looking as finance or interest rates maybe 6 months, a year ago for something like this?
Mr. Mayor, Alderman Pittner, about a year ago when we went through this exercise, and on the flood control in particular, we're using 4% for our anticipated rate for a 20-year bond. So like I said, this issuance was a 30-year term, and we made a decision to take that to market to see what would happen. It was a relatively small issuance this time around, but yeah, the rates were favorable, and like I said, just under 2% true interest cost on a 30-year term.
Okay, thank you.
Any further questions or discussion? Seeing none, please call the roll.
Olson?
Yes.
Pittner?
Yes.
Padragula?
Yes.
Ross?
Yes.
Sitma?
Yes.
Evans?
Yes.
Janser?
Yes.
Motion is approved. We now move to the Series 2020B bond. This is the $7.165 million sales tax revenue bonds from earlier today. Is there a motion?
Move approval.
Motion by Alderwoman Olson. Is there a second? Second by Alderman Janser. Discussion on the motion. Any discussion on the motion to approve? Seeing none, please call the roll.
Olson?
Yes.
Pittner?
Yes.
Padragula?
Yes.
Ross?
Yes.
Sitma?
Yes.
Evans?
Yes.
Janser?
Yes.
Motion is approved. That takes us to the third, which is the Series 2020C, the $16.6 million taxable airport revenue refunding bonds. Is there a motion?
Move approval.
Motion by Alderwoman Olson for approval. Is there a second? Second by Alderwoman Evans. Discussion on the motion. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, please call the roll.
Olson?
Yes.
Pittner?
Yes.
Padragula?
Yes.
Ross?
Yes.
Sitma?
Yes.
Evans?
Yes.
Janser?
Yes.
Motion is approved. All right, that is item 5.1 in its entirety. We will then go back to our regular agenda here. 3 is considered the report of the Planning Commission. Again, we had 4 items. 2 of them are public hearings. So 3.1 and 3.4 can either be taken individually or on consent as recommended by planning. Is there a motion for consent on the remaining 2? If not, we'll take them individually.
I'll make a motion to take them on consent.
Okay, Alderwoman Evans, motion consent on 3.1 and 3.4. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Alderman Pittner. Discussion on the motion. Again, for anyone in the audience or at home, the recommendations coming from the Planning Commission on consent 3.1 and 3.4 will be passed with those recommendations. Last call for discussion. Seeing none, please call the roll.
Evans,
Yes.
Janser,
Yes.
Olson,
Yes.
Pittner,
Yes.
Padrigula,
Yes.
Ross,
Yes.
Sitma.
Yes. Motion is approved. 3.2 on our agenda, public hearing outlot plat and rezoning proposed outlot 6, section 8, 155 north, 82 west. A public hearing to consider an application by Todd and Lisa Shriak and William Shriak Jr. to rezone outlot number 6 south, section 8, 155 north, 82 west from agricultural district to RA, agricultural residential district. The recommendation to council was approve an outlot plat for the square up existing tracts described in as outlot 3 and portions of the southwest quarter, section 8, 155 north, 82 west into a single outlot to be known as outlot 6, section 8, 155 north, 82 west, and to pass the ordinance on first reading to rezone said property from AG to RA. Again, this is a public hearing for anyone to come up and speak in favor or opposed to the recommendations that are before us for item number 3.2. Again, I will offer up public hearing, any and all opportunities to come up and speak either in favor or opposition to the item on 3.2. Seeing none, I would look for a motion. Alderman Janser.
Mr. Mayor, I move we close the public hearing and approve the item.
Motion by Alderman Janser to close the public hearing and approve the item as recommended. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Alderman Pittner. Discussion on the motion. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, please call the roll.
Janser,
Yes.
Olson,
Yes.
Pittner,
Yes.
Padrigula,
Yes.
Ross,
Yes.
Sitma,
Yes.
Evans.
Yes.
Motion is approved. Second public hearing is 3.3, the outlot plat and rezone proposed outlot 7, section 8, 155 north, 82 west. A public hearing to consider an application by Hallie Locke and William Shriak Jr. to rezone outlot 7, section 8, 155 north, 82 west from agricultural residential district and AG agricultural district to RA, which is agricultural residential district only. The two recommendations to City Council was one, approve the outlot plat to square up the existing tracts as described as outlot 4 and portions of the southwest quarter, section 8, 155 north, 82 west into a single outlot to be known as outlot 7, section 8, 155 north, 82 west, and to pass an ordinance on first reading to rezone said property from RA to AG, RA and AG to RA agricultural residential district only. Again, this is a public hearing. Anyone to come up and speak either in favor or opposed to the recommendations that are before us from the Planning Commission. One more time, a public hearing opportunity to come and speak either in favor or opposed to the item that is recommended to us from Planning Commission on 3.3. Seeing none, I would look to the council for a motion.
Mayor,
Alderman Pittner.
I move that we close the public hearing and approve the item.
Motion by Alderman Pittner to close the public hearing and approve the items as recommended. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Alderman Janser. Discussion on the motion. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, please call the roll.
Pittner,
Yep.
Padrigula,
Yes.
Ross,
Yes.
Sitma,
Yes.
Evans,
Yes.
Janser,
Yes.
Olson.
Yes.
Motion is approved. That takes us to number 4 on consent items. We have 12 different items within the consent area of our agenda. 4.7 has been asked to be pulled. Are there any other remaining items within our consent area that need to be pulled?
Mr. Mayor, on item 4.8 on the weed cutting abatements, we have 2 individuals that have filed appeals that will be heard in the next week or so.
Okay.
And that amounts to 9 lots. They are Robert Sparks is the property owner listed, and Nauvoo Recovery LLC.
Is that an item that needs to be pulled and individually discussed, or what would be the best process there?
If we remove those items, the remainder can go through the process.
Okay, let's pull 4.8 and we will take that item individually. Any other items, 4.7, 4.8? Otherwise, they will be passed on with recommendations by staff. Seeing none, I would look to council for a motion.
Move approval on the remaining items.
Motion by Alderwoman Olson, consent on the remaining items. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Alderman Ross. Discussion on the motion. Discussion on the motion. Seeing none, please call the roll.
Olson,
Yes.
Pittner,
Yep.
Padrigula,
Yes.
Ross,
Yes.
Sitma,
Yes.
Evans,
Yes.
Janser.
Yes.
Motion is approved. 4.7 is the 1 million gallon tank demo approval of plans and specs project number 4530. Due to the current and future water transmission line improvements that have been done or are scheduled to be done, and due to the amount of money needed to rehab or replace the 1 million gallon reservoir near the airport, staff has worked with Houston Engineering to complete plans and specifications to demolish this reservoir and complete piping improvements that will benefit the water distribution system. These plans and specifications are now ready to go out for bid. The recommendation to council is to approve the plan and specifications for the tank demolition and piping improvements and authorize the project to be bid. Is there a motion? Motion by Alderman Padrigula, second by Alderman Janser. Alderman Padrigula, you had asked for this to be pulled.
Yes, I had a question for the water people.
Good afternoon, Mr. Jonason.
Thanks, Dan. I noticed that we're going to be getting rid of this unnecessary water tank. Do we have any other large facilities like this? I guess the one in particular I'm thinking about is one on 10th Avenue and 3rd Street Southeast.
Mr. Mayor, Alderman Padrigula, yes, that structure hasn't been, it's the old, we call it the old 3rd Street water tower, but it hasn't been in use for many years, but it is still serving a purpose. There are various different entities that have communications antennas on there. So it has been left up just for that, so that we don't have to put some other structure up in its place.
Is there also a partial underground tank there?
Yes, that is still used.
Oh, that is used, but the tower isn't?
Yep, the tower isn't, but the tank is still used.
Okay, and do we have any other facilities like this that are obsolete or not needed at this point?
Mr. Mayor, Alderman Padrigula, not that I'm aware of right now.
Okay, thank you.
Alderwoman Evans.
Hey, Dan. So it's a $493,000 expenditure out of the $750,000 water distribution budget, right? So it's already allotted in there for, right? This is an allotment of new money. You already put it in your budget for this year.
Mr. Mayor, Alderwoman Evans, yes, it's
Okay.
it was listed in our capital projects, actually. Capital project and maintenance combination, but
Okay.
yes, we had $750,000 allocated towards this work.
Okay, I want to.
Any further questions? Thank you, Mr. Jonason. Any further discussion on the motion to approve? Any further discussion? Seeing none, motion is to approve the recommendations. Please call the roll.
Padrigula,
Yes.
Ross,
Yes.
Sitma,
Yes.
Evans,
Yes.
Janser,
Yes.
Olson,
Yes.
Pittner.
Yes.
Motion is approved. 4.8, the 2020 weed cutting. The Public Works Department has responded to a number of complaints regarding tall grass and weeds. The attached list represents those locations the city abated for the 12-month period beginning August 1, 2019, but has not received payment yet. The city wishes to certify the attached list to the Ward County for collection for those property taxes. Staff recommendations is the approval of the 2020 weed cutting list. The amounts will be special assessed and appear on the property tax statements at year end. We do have 9 of those items, or 9 of those different lots that have asked for an appeal. And I would look for a motion if we want to move forward with the separation of those 9, or if we want to move forward just with the recommendations without removing those. Mr. Lakefield, perhaps maybe a little more clarification on that process on the appeal.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, our process does outline that they have the option for an appeal, and they have applied for that appeal, so we do have to go through the process on those particular properties, and we do have them scheduled in the near future here to go through that process. Once we make a decision on the appeal, then the decision is essentially final at that point. The remainder of the items, I think, could go through and be submitted to the county at this point.
For clarification on ordinance as well, the appeal is before the city manager, acting city manager, and that is the final determination based on fact on that appeal.
Mr. Mayor, that is correct. By ordinance, these assessments do not have to come to the council for approval. In the past, they have been brought forth. The list is getting somewhat lengthy at some point, so it is somewhat of an informational item because the ordinance or the process laid out does not require council approval for this, but it does lay out the appeal process.
Alderwoman Evans.
I'd like to make a motion just to pull those 9 out until the appeals are finished and we address the remaining items as one.
We have motion to approve all but the 9 lots. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Alderwoman Olson. Any discussion on the motion? Alderwoman Evans.
Mr. Lakefield, can you explain just for my benefit and maybe viewers what the process is with this whole weeds? When does the city come out after, like, how long are the homeowners given an opportunity? How long is it abated? Just so people get an understanding that it's not like this happened last week and now we're going to do this.
Mr. Mayor, Alderwoman Evans, it is laid out in ordinance. They are sent a notification, and the city does publish the notice to cut grass and weeds in the Minot Daily as well. They are supposed to be given at least 5 days to respond. Typically, when they send them the notices out to the property owners, they send them by regular mail. So they do give them a longer time to respond to allow for the mail delivery time. They go out and check once the allotted time has expired and document the nuisance, take pictures, those types of things. And if it hasn't been abated at that point, they go ahead and mow the lots. Ordinance does establish a cost, and it's a rate per square foot. So they assess the fee. They send an invoice to the property owner and give them the opportunity to pay for the service. And then they are further sent a notice that if they don't pay, that it will be assessed to the property taxes. And it gives them the date and time of any hearing or to contact the city manager's office to arrange for an appeal.
And so if some of these are from 2019?
Mr. Mayor, Alderwoman Evans, that is correct.
So is there potential that there's a new property owner now and they're going to be getting like this on their tax bill and not have any idea? Like it wasn't them?
Mr. Mayor, Alderwoman Evans, that is correct.
Okay.
And in one of the appeals, that is exactly the case.
Okay.
The issue with this is there's a deadline to have these submitted to the county so they can be included on the tax assessment. So that's typically this time of the fall. So if anything comes in late or after this point, that ends up being carried over to next year's assessments. And if the property changes hands in the meantime, that could slip through the cracks. However, the existing property owner has received notice and should be aware of that, and that would be a disclosure item at the time of sale.
Thank you for that clarification. That's very helpful.
One of the other clarifications, I think for everyone's benefit too, is a lot of the other communities, larger communities in North Dakota, use the publication in the paper as the notice. That staff have actually gone, in many cases, above and beyond for that individual mailing notice to people in the community, to residents or commercial owners, that they have a complaint filed against them, because we don't actively go out and search for those cases at this point. But as we've seen with that list, that has been a growing number even from the time that we put out the nuisance ad hoc committee a number of years ago. That it's certainly a challenge that isn't going away. for some of the folks that maybe feel a tad bit unhinged that they're billed for this or taxed. I can tell you Bismarck and Fargo have a totally separate attitude for it, and if the weeds are there and the complaint is filed, they come out and cut them because they've already had their notice in the paper in the spring and the fall. So, any further discussion on the motion to approve? Further discussion? Any comments or questions from folks in the audience? Seeing as this does have a number of people attached to this.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, just for clarification, I do have the documents here for one of the appeals, and the notice was sent out on August 8th of 2019. The actual mowing was done on August 29th, so around 3 weeks of time to get that taken care of.
Thank you. Seeing no questions or comments or further discussion, the motion is to approve with the exception of those 9 lots that were identified for appeal. Please call the roll.
Evans?
Yes.
Janser?
Yes.
Olson?
Yes.
Pittner?
Yes.
Padragula?
Yes.
Ross?
Yes.
Sitma?
Yes. Motion is approved. That takes us to 5.2 under our action items, as 5.1 was taken care of right away at the beginning of the meeting. This is the movie theater alcoholic beverage license. At the August 3rd, 2020 regular City Council meeting, the City Council approved a motion directing the City Attorney to draft an ordinance to create an alcoholic beverage license relating specifically to movie theaters. The recommendation to Council is to approve the proposed ordinance on first reading. Documents were attached both to the online and to the handouts requested to be printed. I would look for a motion. Alderman Janser.
Mr. Mayor, I move we approve it.
Motion to approve from Alderman Janser. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Alderman Pittner. Discussion on the motion. Alderwoman Evans.
I have a question for our city attorney.
Good afternoon, Ms. Hendershot.
Oh, either. I just want to make sure how the ordinance is written. It is the term movie theater is written in such a way that it would allow for this license to be acquired not just by AMC, but in other movie theaters like Oak Park Theater or anybody who meets the square footage and occupancy numbers.
Mr. Mayor and Alderwoman Evans, yes. We checked with the building official on the square footage of Oak Park Theater and the number of fixed seats, and we assured that the definition would allow for Oak Park to also be eligible for this type of license if they choose to.
Terrific. Thank you. That's all I had.
Further discussion on the motion. Alderwoman Olson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I am glad that this is before us. I think that this is much cleaner than what was initially proposed, so I'm glad that we have quickly gotten to this point, and I get the sense that it certainly will be approved. I have to say personally, so I know as an alderman that this is something that meets the letter of the law, and so I am going to vote to approve it. I think if I were taking my grandchildren to a G-rated movie, I wouldn't feel comfortable having someone sit close to me that had an alcoholic beverage. So it's personal choice. I don't know if the theater management will take that into consideration. I don't think it should be part of the ordinance, but I don't think that I'm alone in that sense. And so perhaps if some of the patrons of the movie theater have that same feeling, that they would bring it up to the management at the movie theater.
It's a very good point, Alderwoman Olson, that this doesn't force anyone in the sales of, but does have that allocation for opportunity if they so do wish. Other discussion? Seeing none, motion is to approve with recommendations. Please call the roll.
Janser?
Yes.
Olson?
Yes.
Pittner?
Yes.
Padragula?
Yes.
Ross?
Yes.
Sitma?
Yes.
Evans?
Yes.
Motion is approved. 5.3 is the recycling discussion. Documents were attached, and we do have, I believe, Assistant Public Works Director looking here for my own, here we go. Jason Sorensen here for our proposal, or rather for a little bit more information, and I believe you have a presentation as well.
And we have a clicker.
Clicker is actually up here, Jason, if you want to come up and grab it.
Should have thrown it. Or the clicker.
Good evening, members of council. Yeah, so Alderwoman Evans requested that I bring recycling back because following the last discussion, it was just kind of left to sit. I was supposed to come up with a proposal, and then some of the COVID concerns occurred, so it's just kind of been stewing. So I think now is as good a time as any to get into kind of some of the meat of the proposal, talk about it, and see if it's something you all want to move forward with. So just to recap, the last time I presented, this is the result of the statistically valid survey that we did. If you don't include any costs at all, when you ask the question, about 65% of the public supported recycling. If you put a charge on it, then those percentages fell, as you can see here. But with a $2 to $3 charge, there's still about 56% of the population that supported recycling. So some of the trying to flesh out some of the structure of the program. We've assumed that it's going to be a single stream curbside recycling program. There's two options for collection. We could do once every other week collection or once every week collection. It doesn't, since our collection vehicles are in front of every residence twice a week, it doesn't affect the cost of the program to do twice a week recycling collection. But one thing to keep in mind is for those people that opt out of the program, they wouldn't receive any type of service on the recycling days. So people that decide not to recycle would be cutting down to once a week collection every week or every other week. We've assumed a 95-gallon cart for bi-weekly collection and a 65-gallon cart for a weekly collection. With the bi-weekly collection, we could go the route of our original trash collection and send out a survey and allow residents to pick their container size. That doesn't really affect the cost of the program going forward. It adds another step that we have to go through, but it did ultimately work out pretty well when we did our initial automation rollout. There would be a one-time opt-out period where basically residents that do not want to participate would have to call us, contact us in some way, shape, or form, and let us know that they do not want to be a part of a program. If they don't respond after a certain period of time, they would automatically be opted in, and they would get a container, and then they would be receiving recycling services. We would hire a full-time recycling coordinator. That person would manage the transfer facility, go around town and do bin audits, work with education programs in the schools, a lot of different tasks. We're assuming at this point that the program would not accept glass just because of glass is a heavy material to ship to Minneapolis, and it ultimately has no value once it gets there. We actually pay for them to take the glass off our hands. And then, like I said, the transfer facility would be operated by the new coordinator position, and existing staff would operate it. Here are the capital costs. We've talked about these before. Ultimately, what we need to get the program going, we don't have a means of getting material from our truck into a different type of truck to get it to Minneapolis. So we need a transfer station, a compactor, and a couple of trailers. We would own the trailers, and we would hire out a trucking firm that would run the trailers back and forth for us. And then we'd have to order the containers. Based on the survey, it's just over 7,000 containers. So you're looking at about capital costs about $2 million. We currently have just over $1 million set aside for recycling. So we're looking at about a $1 million shortfall at this point. And the cost analysis that you'll see in the next few pictures or pages, there's no debt service in the cost analysis. I'm assuming that the capital will be paid out of reserves or some other form. So the cost of the program is just the ongoing cost, no capital repayment. One thing to consider that it's probably premature at this point, but I don't have anything in the cost analysis or any of the capital costs when we start digging into the meat of where the transfer facility will go. We have to look at the landfill expansion that was approved last year is going to give us another 20 to 25 years worth of life at our current facility. And our preference would be to move the entrance to the landfill south off of 37th Avenue. I think it's much more conducive to heavy truck traffic instead of the road that we've been using for the past many years. So that could potentially be another expense. We'd have to look at where the transfer facility goes and make sure it works for both locations in case we were to build it now and then move the entrance at a later date, but just something else to consider. So in order to do a cost analysis over more than a year or two, you have to make a lot of assumptions. So here's a list of them. Like I said, we're assuming capital costs will be paid up front from reserves. We're assuming a 55% initial participation rate, and then we increase that about 1.5% every year. 400 pounds of material generated per household per year. That's pretty much an industry standard. Checking with other cities in the state, they generate about that same number. The recycling coordinator is about a $50,000 per year plus benefits position. Sanitation staff would operate the transfer facility. Transport costs, about $120 per ton, and then we increase that 1% annually. Processing costs, $76 per ton, increase that 1.3% annually. And then commodity rebate, that's the material, or that's the money that they pay us for whatever we sent to them, currently is averaging about $60 per ton. So in the end, we end up paying about $16 per ton for the material that's the net that we would pay. As commodity prices increase, eventually that 16, could potentially go down to 0, depending on how commodity markets go, which are very unpredictable. This again is assuming the program excludes glass. Then the monthly cost for a 65-gallon container, we would increase 50 cents per month, and the monthly cost for a 95-gallon container, we would increase $1 per month. The idea behind that is to get the spread between the 35, 65, and 95 further apart so that there's an incentive to recycle. You can go from a 95 to a 65, you can reduce your trash fee by $2, and in the end, recycling costs $2, so it's basically a net break even. And then recycling costs an additional $2, $2.50, or $3. I've done the analysis for all three. So when you look on the revenue side of the costs, here are our current rates, $14.72, $16.22, and $17.72. Here are the proposed new rates. And then this is what we collect annually in revenues just for trash collection. The recycling fees at $2 generates about another $168,000 a year. And then this is the total annual trash and recycling fees that are collected. So those numbers get plugged into a cost analysis that looks like this. So the net sanitation costs, you can see there that's sanitation and recycling. So that's our garbage collection with recycling added on. About in 2021, about $2.6 million. Here are the revenue generators for the recycling fees at $2, $2.50, and $3, anywhere from $168,000 to $250,000. These are the total revenues that get generated, and then basically just subtract one from the other. And this is how the program operates over a 10-year period. You end up with either a surplus or shortfall, depending on how things are going. And all three of these programs run at a surplus for at least the next 10 years based on the assumptions we made. So basically, that's about the gist of the program. If there was a determination that council wanted to move forward with the program, really about the earliest that program would kick off would probably about spring of 2022. We would need time to hire a firm to design and then ultimately build a transfer facility. That generally takes a good portion of a year. You'd never want to start a program like this in the middle of winter. So that basically takes you out to then spring of 22 would be the earliest the program would start. So with that, if you have any questions, I'd certainly be happy to answer.
Thank you, Jason. I appreciate it. Alderman Janser, did you have a question?
I did. Thanks, Jason. Appreciate the presentation. So the tie into where the entrance to the landfill is, so the assumption is that the transfer facility would be there. Is that the reason that's tied together?
Mayor Sema, Alderman Janser, yeah, I mean, our preference would be in the future, if we're going to be at that location for another 20 years, I think it would make sense to get all that heavy truck traffic out of that neighborhood. And if that's the case, then I think it would make sense to build a transfer facility down closer to 37th Avenue. So there's, that's probably one big picture, long-term thinking item that we should flesh out before we start designing something.
Okay, thank you.
Alderwoman Evans.
So let's just sort of task this out by year. So 2021, realistically, if we approve this today, would probably be the development building of a transfer facility. That would be, the bulk of the next 12 months.
Correct.
Which is 1.25 million.
Yep.
And we have 1 million and some change already allotted in a fund. And then after that would be the additional costs, the compactor, the trailers, the containers. At what point would we have to hire the recycling coordinator?
Mayor Sema, Alderwoman Evans, probably not until the early part of 2022.
Okay.
We would probably want to get that person on board prior to the program starting, and then roll that program out. We'll have to, we'll send out flyers ultimately and get everybody in town who's a sanitation customer of ours alerted that this is going to start. We would want to make sure that everybody who wants to opt out is given the opportunity to opt out. So that'll take the first few months of 2022. So then we would need to order garbage cans or the trash carts. Those take some time to get manufactured. They take some time to get delivered. So yeah, early to mid 22 would be a pretty good assumption, I think, for a program start.
So we'd still have time to, figure out as a government how to, come up with the additional funds needed for the next stage of the program after the transfer facility is built.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Alderwoman Olson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Jason, we've always talked opt-out. What do you think the impact would be if it were opt-in?
Mayor Sema, Alderwoman Olson, it's a good question. Generally, when we send out information and ask people to respond, the response level is pretty low. Even people that maybe don't care one way or another or in favor, it just, when we did the survey to find out what size carts members of the public wanted, we had 12,500 accounts or something like that at that point, and we probably only had about 3,000 people that actually reached out and selected a size. Everybody else got a default size, which is in the middle. So, I guess in this case, the people that feel really strongly about not wanting to recycle, I think they would definitely respond, and then the people that are just in the middle and don't care one way or another, then we ultimately get them on board. If we're trying to make a difference, ultimately we want to divert as much volume as possible. So the more people we have on the program, the better.
So, and just a continuing question. When we've talked about once they become a customer, is it by the person or by the address? So, if I said yes, is wherever I live, am I going to be a customer, or it just is attached to my current address?
Mayor Sema, Alderwoman Olson, basically right now it's by the address, so, and what we've kind of modeled this after Bismarck. So if you were to opt out at your current location, you only get a one-time opt-out period. So when you move, you will get recycling at the new location. If you were to opt in initially, then you wouldn't have the opportunity to opt out at your second location. So it pretty much goes with the address.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, Alderman Ross.
Mr. Mayor, I've got just a couple of questions, Jason.
Sure.
Now, you said Bismarck has got a transfer facility similar to this? Or
Mayor Sema, Alderman Ross, so back in the day, the city of Bismarck used to bale their trash before it went into the landfill, so they'd compact it into a big block and then put it in their landfill that way. So they have a baler building. They no longer do that. So what they do is they lease their baler building to Waste Management. Waste Management does all the collection. They do the transferring using the leased facility from the city of Bismarck, and then they transfer to Minneapolis from there.
So is there another community that has a facility an existing facility that is what we want to do? Or what the proposed is?
Alderman Sitma, or Mayor Sitma, Alderman Ross, probably not. Dickinson, they just started their program last year. There again, they had a baler building, so they're utilizing that building. So a lot of the communities that are recycling, either Grand Forks, I think Waste Management either built or they already had a transfer facility. City of Fargo is using Minot Recycling as their transfer in town. So most other communities have started that have already had something to use for a transfer facility.
I'm just looking, I'd like to reach out to a community that has an existing, and just to find out, pros and cons.
Sure.
That's why I'm asking that, but just a couple more questions.
Continue.
Are the engineering and design costs, are they built into that 1.25?
Mayor Sitma, Alderman Ross, I think so. I've tried to make sure that 1.25 million will cover the bulk of it, so I believe so.
Okay. And finally, if a person wants to opt out, will that be reflected in their fees? Would they be lower, or is this going to be everybody just gets charged?
Mayor Sitma, Alderman Ross, so if you opt out, then yeah, you wouldn't see the additional charge.
Okay.
Based on what I proposed, like I said, I'm trying to get that larger spread between the different containers, so everybody would see either the 50 cent or the $1 increase to get the differential between the carts larger. But other than that, there wouldn't be then a recycling fee if you opt out.
And for a past little bit of information, perhaps for the people watching or will watch this later too, one of the challenges that we have that is maybe perhaps a little bit different or unique is, as Jason said, a lot of other communities have had other facilities, but the distance really becomes one of our biggest challenges in that trucking cost. And Jason, that's actually one of my questions. We're going to have a lot of trucks on the road throughout the year when or if this would ever come to fruition. My question is actually, has there been any issues in the Minneapolis area over safety concerns? As a lot of those trucks potentially down the road would be coming in and out. Was this area of Minneapolis affected by all of that devastation that took place earlier this year?
Mayor Sitma, not that I'm aware of. Prior to putting together my analysis, I did contact a gentleman at DEMCON who operates one of the transfer facilities and asked him, what have I missed in the last 6 months? Are any assumptions in my cost analysis wrong? What's happened to recycling in general during the pandemic? And really, he said business as usual. There have been some facilities that have shut down temporarily due to positive cases and things of that nature. But as far as safety, none that I know of. Okay. It's certainly more truck traffic, but they're certainly used to truck traffic out there. So,
okay. Thank you. Further questions, Alderman Ross.
So we're basically talking about plastics.
Mayor Sitma, Alderman Ross. So it would be paper, plastic, cardboard, metals. Everything that's recyclable except for glass.
Okay.
With some caveats, perhaps their food containers, contamination, that comes into part of that education process. So that's part of the big stand-up too, as we learned earlier from Jason's presentations.
Mr. Mayor?
Alderman Janser.
A question again, I guess back to the relocation of the landfill entrance. Do we have an idea of what that's going to cost?
Mayor Sitma, Alderman Janser, at this point, no. So I have some rough estimates on a couple phases of it. There'd have to be some, obviously some grading work and different things. We know what the building costs. We'd have to get our landfill scale shack either moved or construct a new one. We'd have to move the scales. moving the scales was somewhere in the neighborhood of a couple $100,000. And then there'd be a road network that would have to be extended, all the way from 37th up to where we're currently disposing. So there's about a half mile of roadway that'd have to get constructed. So yeah, all those things definitely, it's probably in the neighborhood of $1.5 million, somewhere in there. I'm not positive on what road construction costs, but.
Okay, and if I may follow up.
Continue, yes, please.
Is there a identified source for those funds or where that comes from?
At this point, no.
Okay. So, so we've sort of got the million that would be needed for the program, and then we've got this notionally $1.5 million or $2 million that would be the revisions at the landfill that we kind of don't have a source for at this point. Unless our finance director has a thought on that, I guess.
Mr. Lakefield.
Mr. Mayor, Alderman Janser, I would have to look up to find out what the landfill has as its fund balance. It looks like Sue's probably doing that right now. It's possible that they would have enough funding in fund balance to fund that.
Okay.
We'll wait for confirmation on that. But Jason, if you had anything further to add on that.
Mayor Sitma, Alderman Janser, and one thing that could be, and it's maybe not the best location for it initially, but it could maybe be more centrally located in the landfill today. And then a couple years down the road, if we decide to move the entrance, then it's at least in a location where you don't have to drive all the way across the landfill to get to it.
Further questions for Jason? Alderman Patagula.
Thanks. I wanted to ask about the size of the recycling containers. One of the concerns I have is that some homeowners don't have the space, or it's difficult to haul one out. In our case, we have the smallest size container, and I think we probably, after our discussion, we probably need at least that size to contain recycling. But a 95-gallon container for everyone seems awfully big. Is there any chance we could give people a choice of either a 65 or a 95-gallon container for the recycling?
Mayor Sitma, Alderman Padragula, yeah, I mean, like I said, it's really just another step in the process. So we would do what we did before we started automation. We'd have to send out basically a postcard, and we'd have to have a number for people to call and then select their size, and then decide, based on whoever doesn't respond, what size they're going to get. So it's another step. It can certainly be added in.
Thank you.
Generally on recycling, what we've heard from a lot of communities, the size of the container probably depends on what we decide if we want to do weekly collection or biweekly collection. In speaking with actually some residents from the city of Bismarck, a lot of them, they have biweekly collection, and many of them complain that their receptacle isn't large enough. They use 95. So a lot of people have no problem filling a 95-gallon container every 2 weeks with recyclables.
Some of us try to be more frugal in terms of what we buy.
Yeah.
Further questions for Assistant Public Works Director Alderman Ross?
Jason, once again, a great presentation. In talking with other communities, what are you hearing? I guess what I'm concerned about is, we have the cost there, but there seems to be somewhat of some unknowns out there, cost-wise. And that kind of concerns me. Also, I just want to hear if you've heard any feedback from other communities in their recycling I know the pros, but what are we hearing? Has there been any feedback on cons? Something, surprises that came up that they didn't realize? Or have you heard any or gotten any feedback like that?
Mayor Sitma, Alderman Ross, as far as the costs, yeah, that I share that concern. Going through this analysis, I've tried to make sure that all of my costs and assumptions are as conservative as possible. I'm basing a lot of the numbers and a lot of the information based on the city of Dickinson. They're the most recent program. that started up, and the program they started up is pretty much identical to the one that, they're doing self-collection. They're using a third party to haul, so they have a lot of similarities into what we're projecting. So, and then what I'm hearing from DEMCON or the people in the recycling industry is that they all feel that the market is pretty much bottomed out. It's pretty much at a level right now. It's probably been at this level for about a year. And they've seen some small rebounds in some things, but for the most part, it's remained pretty steady, and they feel this is the bottom. So they don't feel that it's going to get any worse. Doesn't mean it can't get worse, of course. Regarding, cons, I really haven't heard any. As far as like the city of Bismarck, along with their curbside program, they had drop-offs. That did not work well at all. I think it was last year they pulled all their drop-offs in because magically overnight a couch would show up in the cardboard recycling roll-off. And we spoke with this in depth with the city of Fargo, and they actually have a person that drives around, and that's his job. I don't know if he's the recycling coordinator, but he drives around to all their different drop-offs and polices them all day long, because once a couch ends up there, then they seem to multiply, and then you have a couple of chairs and a table to go with it. So they make sure they monitor these, but most communities have gone away from the drop-offs, and they're veering toward the curbside. As far as any other cons, like I said, I haven't heard a lot. City of Dickinson, when they implemented their program, it was mandatory for all citizens. And we spoke with them a lot about, how did that go? Obviously there's a certain segment of the population that wasn't happy about it. And they said ultimately, he said they probably had maybe a handful of containers across the city that just, once they dropped them off, they never moved. So they did pick those up, but they have a couple of, maybe a handful or two of people that just absolutely refused. But everybody pretty much has gotten on board with it.
Thank you.
Mr. Lakefield.
Mr. Mayor, I do have an update. It looks like right in the neighborhood, excuse me, of 1 million available fund balance right now, and it's forecast to be approximately 1.6 million at the end of 2020.
Thank you for that update. Any other questions for Mr. Sorensen? Alderwoman Olson.
This is really a question for Mr. Lakefield. So the 1.6 million could only be used within sanitation. It wouldn't be used for anything else. I'm just thinking, we are still in a pandemic. I'm a little concerned about our revenue. So is that allocated strictly for sanitation?
Mr. Lakefield.
Mr. Mayor, Alderwoman Olson, that is correct. Typically, those funds are used within that fund.
Okay, thank you.
And within the presentation, I think on the current assumptions, bullet point number 1, upfront from reserves, that is referencing from those reserves, or are we talking from the reserves that we've already put that initial amount aside?
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, that would be from the fund balance reserves already also, but it is items that were included in prior year's budgets.
Thank you for that clarification. Alderman Patagula.
So I want to be clear about this. The capital improvements, the outlay we'd have to spend, the program covers itself with increased fees. That's not an issue, apparently. But the outlay we'd have to make for the vehicles, for the transfer station, for all that stuff would cost about $1.2 million essentially. And we have 1 million or 1.6 million?
Mr. Lakefield.
Mr. Mayor, Alderman Padragula, we have right now in the slide, it lays out that there were just about $767,000 of community facilities money that was allocated to this project some time ago. And then money included in the landfill budget already of $250,000. And because that money hasn't been spent in the landfill budget, it would have to be reappropriated in a future year to be able to spend that. So that portion of the money would already be included in the fund balance. The community facilities funding that's included in this slide would not be part of the landfill or sanitation's fund balance at this point. That is a separate fund.
So again, I'm still not clear about this, forgive me. We would have to come up with $1 million, and we could use 3/4 of that, or we wouldn't be forced to allocate 3/4 of that, the stuff coming from the community facility fund, correct?
Mr. Mayor, Alderman Padrigula, you could ultimately fund this from another funding source without using the community facilities funds, if that's what you're asking. However, that money is obligated or earmarked already for this project, and because we no longer have community facilities funds available or using those funds for that purpose, I don't think that they could be reallocated to another project. So if those funds weren't used from community facilities, they would revert back into the sales tax funds and be distributed otherwise.
I guess what I'm getting at is, and my concern, like Lisa mentioned, is the current economic uncertainty related to the coronavirus. And I'm wanting to, my own personal preference is wanting to keep as much money as possible in reserves. I know some is allocated. It sounds like the trash sanitation funds are pretty much limited to that purpose. But if there were a financial emergency, you know, you said earlier that they're pretty much consigned to that purpose. But if there were a financial emergency, would we have some freedom to draw upon those funds or to rearrange things? It sounds like, you know, with the community facilities money, we could, you know, put it back into the general fund. That's what I'm getting at.
Mr. Mayor, Alderman Padrigula, the uses for that penny of sales tax are allocated by ordinance. So at one point, community facilities was able to be used. Currently, we're no longer using that portion of sales tax for community facilities. So the other acceptable uses in that allocation of sales tax is flood control at this point. So without some other ordinance change, I think that's all that we could use those funds for at this point.
But we could change the ordinance.
And Alderman Padrigula, I'll caution that we pretty much locked in that portion when we went to bonding and locked in that percentage that we need to fund flood control for the local cost share. Outside of that, it becomes a real big issue and likely hampers our bond issue moving forward, period, for anything flood control related if we start changing things after we locked it in for our bonding capacity needs. Correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Lakefield.
Mr. Mayor and members of the council, that would be a concern. Probably not so much for existing issues that we have out here, but certainly for future issues, if we're able to change that at whim for future obligations. I know that was a consideration with this issuance of the debt because it was a relatively small bond issue and the coverage was you know, well covered. But if we start moving that money around and using it for something else, that would probably affect future bond issuance.
So you're saying flood control, we're locked into that portion of it at least?
Mr. Mayor and Alderman Padrigula, I would say that would be the best course of action at this point.
Okay, thank you.
Alderwoman Evans.
So following up on Alderman Padrigula's question, because I don't think it got answered. So in your presentation, Jason, you said total available is 1,000,006, this one. And then Dave, you said at the end of 2020, we'll be at 1.6 million. Is that correct? Like what number is correct? Available funds at the end of 2020.
Mr. Mayor, Alderwoman Evans, we're talking about two different numbers.
Okay.
So the real answer is about 2.3 or 2.4, if I can do the math in my head, because the community facilities money is in a separate fund.
Okay.
And the fund balance that we're referring to that we're forecasting to be at 1.6 by the end of 2020. Okay. Okay. Including community facilities. Okay. I stand corrected. So the number is 1.6.
Okay, so then the
available.
difference then only becomes 300,000. But certainly there is sufficient current available funds for a transfer facility, as Mr. Sorensen has estimated the cost at 1.2, right?
Mr. Lakefield.
Mayor Sitma, Alderwoman Evans, that would be correct.
Okay.
Then we would have to find a funding source for the remaining equipment to get to
Right,
the 1.9.
okay. Thank you, Dave.
A lot of moving numbers.
Yes.
All inside of that. Then I would only question, seeing as we have a fund balance within that funding mechanism, sanitation, is that superseding any other needs that we would have, that perhaps those reserves for whether it be any of the large-scale equipment that we rely on for the landfill itself? Or is that putting us into a corner?
Mayor Sitma.
A very tough question. I apologize, but
Yeah, without sitting down with Dave and Sue and looking at what's there, because we put a money aside every year for the next cell that we need to construct and some of those things. And I don't know where those necessarily sit in our budget. I don't think they're included as part of the 1 million, but that's where I rely on those two, I guess.
So,
Alderman Janser.
So it kind of comes back to what I was asking about before. You know, in a sense, you know, we're talking about recycling, but we should really be talking about getting the entrance to the landfill moved so that we can put the building where it needs to be to do the recycling.
Mr. Mayor,
Lakefield.
Alderman Janser, I think you're correct. And that is a cost that ultimately would be part of that project to take advantage of the landfill expansion on the southern side. Some of that work would need to be done at some point in the future here, regardless if recycling comes on board. So I don't think that cost would be solely, you know, because of recycling. At some point in the future, some of that work will need to be done regardless.
Continue, Mr. Alderman Janser.
And Mr. Lakefield, you know, I certainly acknowledge that, but it's also true that, you know, that isn't programmed quite yet at this point. And if we're going to do recycling right, and if we're going to locate this transfer facility where it probably ultimately should be, then we need to get that done. I mean, that's kind of what I'm coming to as we go through this, you know, discussion.
Perhaps, Jason, that might alleviate some concern over unknowns. Perhaps we can get I think, an educated estimate on what that might look like, as Mr. Lakefield and I think the rest of us acknowledge that expansion at some point is coming. If we have a real solid idea on what those costs would look like now, to I think finite detail as close as we can get might help get to a final number and alleviate that question, as well as what the total cost of this stand-up would be approximately 2022.
Sure. Mayor Sitma, one thing I'd just like to add, you know, I guess there's nothing in paper, there's nothing written down where we have to start recycling by a certain date. You know, so I think this can be bitten off in small chunks. You know, if I guess there's agreement that our future entrance should be off of 37th Avenue, then that's probably step one. I agree with you, Alderman Janser. And then, you know, so I think what we can do is maybe flesh out some of those details in that cost and put this all together, and then basically come up with a funding scheme over, you know, whether it's 2, 3, or 4 years, you know, whatever we want to see as a start date for recycling, we can back calculate and see, okay, we need to put away $500,000 for the next 3 or 4 years, or however that pencils out.
Alderman Patagula.
When you come back, I guess I'd also like to maybe have in graphical form where the money's coming from. I'm still having a hard time with it. I'm not financially skilled like Mr. Lakefield is. And I know some of it's allocated, but it's not clear how much really is allocated to these other purposes. And my concern, I don't have a problem at this point with recycling. I think it makes sense. My concern is with the economic situation right now. And if we're talking about $1 million or $1.5 million or $2 million, under these very challenging economic circumstances, that's what gives me pause. And that's where I'd like, clarification, I guess, in writing and maybe with some arrows of where the money's coming from, where we expect it to be. If the money's sitting in the bank and it's allocated for this, then I don't have as much of a problem. If it's sitting in the bank, but not much of it or not all of it is allocated for this purpose and could be potentially redirected in case of an emergency, then I'm more leery. So I think that's what I'm struggling with. It's not the merits of the proposal, and I think I have to compliment you, Jason. I think this current proposal is much better fleshed out and much more descriptive than the previous ones have been. I think we have made major progress in terms of agreeing that this would be a voluntary program, having the choice points clearly made out. Is it every 2 weeks or every week? I think you've done an excellent job, and your consultants and the finance people have done an excellent job clarifying a lot of those issues. So we're much farther along the pathway, I think. It's just, for me, it's the money situation and the reluctance. Kind of like City Hall. I think we need a new City Hall, but I guess I'm just a little leery about the time. If it's something we can spread out, if we can get $500,000 a year next year and then $500,000 the year after, that sounds to me like that's kind of some reserves, maybe, or potential reserves, at least we should be looking at holding on to. So, that's my take on it. It's my hesitance about it. And again, the reports are getting much more focused. The plan is getting much more focused. I think we have a much better timeline. But the financial end of it is still a little bit troubling. And I guess the best example of that today was the realization that we're going to have to spend probably $1.5 million on moving the entrance to the landfill. I think that's something, too, that members of the community might be concerned about, particularly the hospital. Because in the past, one of the concerns about this whole landfill site was putting extra truck traffic on, was it 37th Avenue, and its possible interference with the hospital. I think one thing we're going to have to look at, too, is if we do move the entrance around, what are we going to do about that current road, which is in pretty bad shape, in which the neighbors there have been complaining about for years. I think we owe it to them to repave it and, not wait how many ever years till it gets developed and we can allocate the costs of that road. They've endured a lot of inconvenience, a lot of noise, a lot of blowing around stuff, and I think that may have to enter into our considerations of fixing that road. So I want to just be very clear about what I'm concerned about, where my hesitance is coming from. And I think you've done an excellent job satisfying a lot of questions and concerns, and that's just kind of what I'd like you, from my perspective, to kind of focus on and help me understand. Thanks.
Alderwoman Evans.
So I moved here 37 months ago, and this topic was being discussed 37 months ago. I brought this back because there's been way too much hesitancy over the past few years. I heard this over and over again from voters. Take a vote one way or the other. Get a recycling program or don't, but don't continue deferring this because of X, Y, and Z. So I'd like for us to vote on this. Alderman Padrigula, I don't think we have 55% of the Minot population that supports us moving and spending money on City Hall. We have 55%. We spent $10,000, surveying our citizens, and 66% of them support recycling, and still a majority support paying up to $3 a month. So the people have spoken. We are here to represent the people. I think we all were pleasantly surprised, at least I was, that even 55% of our fellow Minoters would support a $3 cost a month for this program. And I think we owe it to them to take a vote and move forward. I agree with Jason. This needs to be done incrementally. We can't just, pop up, a recycling program in 6 months. But, we need to start somewhere. And I think starting with the transfer facility that we have allotted funds for, earmarked for a transfer facility, is a great start as we work on then figuring out the rest of the steps of it. But you have to start somewhere.
Alderman Pittner.
Thank you, Mayor. Jason, could you go back to the slide with the survey results on it? Now, I know there was 55% with the 2 to 3 costs, and that's where you think we would be, is in the $2 to $3 cost. What would drive that up to a $3 to $5 cost?
Mayor Sitma, Alderman Pittner, I guess, if you were to go back to this page, that when you start adding up all of the costs, basically it breaks down to, somewhere around about a $3 per household cost. So what would drive that up? I guess the two really, variable numbers, I think transport and labor are pretty, I think they're pretty firm numbers. I think even the processing number is pretty firm. The commodity rebate, that's definitely a number that over the last 5 years has been all over the board, from very high to currently very low. So, when you look at the program, there's not a lot of, costs. The majority of the costs are the transport costs for us to get it to Minneapolis when you look at the program, and those are, pretty stable numbers, I think.
Okay.
Further questions for our Assistant Public Works Director?
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, please continue.
I guess just to go back to what Alderman Padragula, as I was writing this proposal, I think I probably felt like I was throwing a grenade in the middle of this thing when I put in the landfill entrance. But it's a discussion point that probably because it was a pretty, I guess, call it a contentious topic. There was, when this went through planning and council, there was, no development south of the half quarter line on that south quarter. And, a lot of people didn't want all the truck traffic, on 37th Avenue running by Trinity Hospital. But I guess, in the grand scheme of things, if there's a road in the city of Minot that was built for truck traffic, it was 37th Avenue Southwest. So that's why I just wanted to bring it to your guys' attention. I still think it's important if we're truly gonna, we're gonna permit potentially a 20 to 25 year expansion at a current location. I guess if we truly plan on utilizing that full 20 to 25 years prior to the relocation, if that's the direction we decide to go, that I just wanted all of your buy-in, I guess, as to move in that direction. So it's related, but yet it's kind of a whole separate topic that as we can see tonight, kind of opened up another can of worms, but it's something that we should talk about.
Alderwoman Evans.
So, Jason, tell me, so we do not have to build a transfer facility at the current landfill, like that we are free to build this transfer facility anywhere we want in the city limits, correct?
That is certainly true.
Right, so, and whether we built it on North Hill or at the current landfill, there still would have to be discussion of moving the landfill entrance, is my understanding, regardless of where the transfer facility is located?
Mayor Sitma, Alderwoman Evans, probably not.
Okay.
If the decision is made that we'll leave it where it's at, then, just, forget about it, and we'll leave it where it's at, and we can find, a spot within our current footprint that makes sense for it. We have room in our current landfill to build a transfer facility. It's just, I'm trying to look forward as to if things are going to change, I would like that facility to be a little more centrally located. So.
So what would you think would be the process, let's say, if it was approved to move ahead with the transfer facility, would there be a committee? How would it be decided where that transfer facility, where it would make the most sense for that to be located? Economically, socially, all of the factors?
Mayor Sitma, Alderwoman Evans, generally, as staff, we would bring you a recommendation,
okay.
And we would, look at all that stuff and bring a recommendation. And if there's not agreement, we could look at alternate locations. I guess you asked about, does it need to be on the landfill or can it be anywhere? It can be anywhere. However, we own, 3/4 sections of land, in and around the landfill. So any of those other options would, cost more because of land costs.
Thank you.
Further questions? If not, Jason, thank you. We'd just perhaps in upcoming grab some of that information as you're able to put it together, both on the cost of that road, what that would look like, and then also in the reserves area, if there's funds set aside, or if that would drain it down to zero, whatever that would look like, if this were to move forward within this budget cycle or even in the next budget cycle.
Thank you.
Thank you. And likely we will see this issue back for discussion and or a vote, I would assume, in the not too distant future.
I'd like to make a motion then for that.
We can simply, if you want to work with staff, you can add that to whatever meeting that you would like in the upcoming meetings. So we won't need a motion for that. Alderman Pittner.
Mayor, I'll make a motion if I could to postpone the recycling discussion to coincide with the landfill relocations discussion in July of next year. Because I think that this program and moving forward with the recycling program very closely ties into whether or not we invest in this in the current site and in the current location. And it only by further investment into this site and transfer facility at the landfill location, I think it further ties us and makes the discussion a year from now in July somewhat moot if we continue to invest at this site. So I'll just throw that out there. I don't know how it will be perceived, if it'll even get a second, but those are my thoughts that, again, I think these two discussion items need to be tied together, whether or not we're going to continue to invest in this site with the transfer facility, or if we are going to truly look at moving the landfill, we need to have all those things on the table.
I'll second.
Second from Alderman Ross. Discussion on that? Any discussion on the motion to postpone until the same time, July of next year? Alderman Pittner.
Thank you, Mayor. I believe July was when we had decided to take up the landfill discussion again, and my thoughts on it when we talk about moving the current landfill, and my fear is investing additional funds and dollars into this site, but then if next July we decide to move forward with moving the landfill, it makes the decision to move it even that much harder and that much more difficult and that much more clouded. I think that these items should be taken at the same time. I think they go hand in hand. That's my thought and my feelings on it. So, and if I continue, Mayor, going back to the cost and again, I was surprised as well with the $2 to $3 cost and 55%. But if we go to a $3 to $5 cost, we go down to 37.5%. I mean, are we going to allow individuals to opt out if their bill is over $3 because they were not comfortable with it at that point? I know it's pennies, but again, I'm trying to consider all these things when making these decisions.
Alderwoman Evans.
So we're not going up to $5. Jason has forecast for 10 years. It's set at, maximum of $3. It will be a self-sufficient program. I will not support your motion. I, again, believe that people elect us to represent their will, regardless of what we feel. 55% of Minoters in a scientific poll said they would pay $2 to $3, and that's what we're giving them to recycle. And so I cannot support this being deferred yet again in our city.
Alderman Patagula.
I wanted to get an update on this July business. I thought we had, and where we stand with going ahead with a new landfill, I thought we had already authorized staff, and we recently, I think, had approved a contract or request for bids or something like that to go ahead with engineering planning. So I'm not quite sure. I thought we already were moving in that direction. Could someone clarify for me?
Patagula, if I do recall correctly, that the expansion plan, in fact, was correct. Is that they had made that application. I think the premise was that it was deferred until July of next year until any further exploration of moving the landfill in the future beyond that for a possible site relocation would be considered at that time. And I would look to staff for any correction if I maybe I'm getting the head nod is correct.
So we haven't made a commitment to move?
We have not made a commitment to move.
But we are studying it. We have made a commitment to study it.
We have put that off until July of next year.
And was there a reason we made it July?
I would have to look back, Alderman Janser.
If I may help recall this a little bit, I believe that what happened was we were presented with a proposal to authorize, I think it was $325,000 to do to go forward with the study about relocating the landfill. And because of the financial uncertainties and because of COVID and so forth, we made the decision to push that back for a year.
Thank you.
Further discussion on the motion to defer this discussion until July of 2021, coinciding with that. Alderwoman Olson.
Well, Mr. Mayor, if my memory is serving me correct, when we were discussing this in January and the proposal was made for the scientific survey, at that time, I believe our intent was to move forward with this if we found a favorable number in our residents looking like they were in favor of recycling. And we did get the results of that, and as Jason mentioned, it kind of got put on the back burner because of the pandemic. But I think that we have publicly said that we intend to move forward with this with the support of our residents, and we have the numbers that prove that we do have the support of the residents. So I'd like to see us move forward.
Alderman Ross.
Mr. Mayor, I'm all for recycling. I'm also all for doing it right. I think Jason's presentation was an excellent presentation. But just in tonight, we found out that there's potentially $1.5 million more that we would need for this. And you talk about support, and I know what concerns me is, yes, 55% of the people surveyed in the scientific survey were in favor of it. There were 400 people surveyed. So 55% of 400 is 200 people, roughly a little bit. I think pushing this back to next July gives us time to get these unknowns known to us. So I think let's measure twice and cut once, and let's dig in a little bit deeper and find out all the options and all the dollars that are going to be attached to this. And this pushing it back gives us more time to do that. So I'll be in favor of this motion.
Alderwoman Olson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I guess my confusion comes in when do we make the decision? I feel like we've had a number of presentations from Jason, and I think our community is waiting for us to kind of fish or cut bait, and I don't know. I am in favor of recycling. I'm not in favor of funding it right now because I have some hesitancies, so I can't say that I would vote for funding this right now. But I think that we do need to tell our residents, yes, we're going to move forward with this, or we're done. We're just not going to do it. Putting it off for another year frustrates me.
Alderman Patagula.
Yeah, I think Lisa expressed where I'm at with this. I think the numbers say that the thing pays for itself in terms of operations. That's not a problem. I think we have significant public support for it, and it doesn't matter to me whether it's 57 or 58 or 60%. And I think Carrie is right. We're elected to make decisions. And I'm very comfortable with moving ahead. I'm comfortable with moving ahead in that direction. The thing that makes me pause, I'm not sure that I want to wait till next July, but the thing that makes me pause is the financial situation of the world. And, whether it's a retaining wall for City Hall, whether it's a new fire station, I want to hold off a little bit until we get a better sense of where it's going. if, 3 or 4 months from now, I don't feel myself bound with the 6-month thing. If 3 or 4 months from now, it looks like that this disease is starting to come under control, that the economy is starting to stabilize, I'm more than happy to fish at that point. I'm just uncomfortable right now because, again, of the tremendous uncertainty, with the world economy and our state economy, and therefore our city economy. So it's not kicking the can down the road. It is making a decision. But I think when the poll was taken, we didn't have this disaster yet, and that's what gives me pause. So it's just a matter of timing. And I don't have a need to delay it for a year. Even 3 to 6 months would make me feel more comfortable until this thing shakes out a little bit. That's the hesitancy. So it's not public support. It's not the couple dollars a month here or there. It's not those issues at all. It's making any kind of major financial commitment where the economy is so bleak looking. That's what scares me.
I think there's a lot that could be said on either side of this. I'm fairly certain most everyone is locked in wherever their position is at with this. I'm not going to support the motion simply because I'm not in favor of moving the landfill or spending a lot of money either in that regard. So I would like to see something maybe even later this fall or early winter once we have an idea of what our sales tax revenues look like. I have no problem waiting a bit, but maybe waiting until July is just a little too far down the road for me. Any final discussion on this, Alderwoman Evans?
So, Alderwoman Olson, you brought up a good point, and maybe we can work around that, is we can vote to approve a curbside recycling program. And then, in 3 months, once we have, more clear numbers and see how long COVID continues, oil production, all of that stuff, we can pull the trigger on whether or not we feel like we can release the funds for the transfer facility in 2021. I'm wondering if that's something, I'm sensing we're all agreeing we support a recycling program. And that's a huge first step, is getting on record and saying, yes, we are going to pursue a curbside recycling program. How and when will be determined by the economic realities of our community, our city budget, our revenues. But let's go on record as approving a curbside recycling program today.
Assistant Public Works Director, Mr. Sorensen, do you have something more for us?
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, thank you. I guess what I wanted to say is, before we decide to delay the discussion, further, let me flesh out some of the numbers and stuff that we talked about regarding the landfill entrance and those things. We can look at some different funding options. We can put some debt service into the annual operating costs and see how that affects the numbers. So I guess, like I said, before we delay any further, maybe just let me flesh out some stuff before we maybe have that larger talk.
Okay. We do have a motion for a delay on the floor and a second. And this is a motion for delaying until July 2021. Final discussion on any other point that hasn't been made. Alderman Patagula.
Can Ms. Evans
is a motion?
offer a substitute or an amendment to that?
Well, we have to vote on Alderman Pittner's motion. And I can offer.
If it directly conflicts with the original motion, then it cannot be a motion to amend. It would have to be a different motion if this one fails.
Okay.
We do have a motion, and again, that is for delay until July 2021 to resume talks on this issue. There is a second. Please call the roll.
Pittner?
Yes.
Padragula?
No.
Ross?
Yes.
Sitma?
No.
Evans?
No.
Janser?
No.
Olson?
No.
Motion fails.
So I would like to make a motion to approve in concept and the curbside recycling program as articulated by Mr. Sorensen this evening, and to revisit at our perhaps November 16th council meeting how and if we can appropriate funds for that program in 2021.
Very long motion, Alderwoman
Okay.
Evans.
You can make it make it whatever you want.
Proven concept with more information to be added later. Is there a second?
I'll say.
Second from Alderwoman Olson. Discussion on that. Alderman Pittner.
Thank you, Mayor. Can I have maybe just a crystal ball? What kind of information are we looking on? Just so maybe even the public, what information are we waiting on as far as the road, location of the transfer facility?
No, I'm looking.
Alderman Evans.
Oh, sorry. I'm looking more at, whether or not the money we have in the community funds can be allocated, because that's enough for the transfer facility to begin that. So let's see where we are, November-ish, with perhaps, a crisis, a financial crisis that we may not, see coming, that, we would have to do some hard decisions as a city council on reallocating money. So that's all I would be looking at for that point. I mean, certainly, I think, we could ask Mr. Sorensen to bring whatever we wanted at that point. But, I think the first thing is the transfer facility and whether or not the funds from the community fund can be released to begin the transfer facility in 2021.
Alderman Janser.
The only reluctance I have in following that is if we're going to build a transfer facility, we have to know where we're going to build it. And if we're not going to have a new entrance figured out to the landfill and that's where it should be, then we're going to build it somewhere else. And so, I mean, I'm all in favor of, conceptually supporting curbside recycling. I don't have any problem with that. But I think it's naive to think that we don't have to solve these other problems and come up with the other funds in order to make that a reality. And that, that's gonna take care of, it's gonna require dealing with the financial piece of it as well.
For a little historical as well, the council and governing body not too distant long ago did vote in favor of supporting recycling if those numbers came back favorably. All of those factors, I'm not going to support the motion. I've already voted in support of recycling. However, I do want to have a finite detail of a plan or a concept in front of me that is going to look a lot more definitive of what recycling could or would look like. I have no problem bringing it back in 2 weeks, 4 weeks, or 6 weeks with whatever those numbers from Mr. Sorensen look like. But I struggle with supporting kind of an open-ended support when we've already done that once before. Further discussion. Alderman Pittner.
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to echo yours and Alderman Janser's. That's the information I would like to have. I couldn't imagine going into the bank and saying I want a loan for a business and give me $1 million. How are you going to pay it back? I'll figure it out. I mean, that's not a good answer. We need to have things earmarked. We need to know where the dollars are coming from. The taxpayers need to know where the dollars are coming from. And again, so we can do this once and not twice. So I won't support the motion.
Other discussion. We do have a motion and a second in front of us. Please call the roll.
Evans?
Yes.
Janser?
No.
Olson?
Yes.
Pittner?
No.
Padragula?
Yes.
Ross?
No.
Sitma?
No. Motion fails. Alderwoman Evans, I would, and anyone else, I think, within council here, if we do want to bring this back in 2 weeks, 4 weeks, or 6 weeks, you can certainly talk with our city clerk and have that added to our discussion items as well. And I would just look to Mr. Sorensen perhaps for that information in that, I would say, within the next coming weeks, if not month. Thank you. We do have another potentially lengthy item on our agenda this evening. We will see. Item number 6 is the question, the budget question and answer section. We do have our preliminary budget that is before us. 2021 proposed budget. For reference here again, the substantial difference from the 2020 budget, which was $273,262,000 and change, with this budget looking at $143,513, and also a substantial similarity, though, within our levy from 2020 to 2021. I would look to our finance director, Mr. Lakefield.
Point of order.
I'm sorry, Alderman Janser.
Excuse me, Mr. Mayor.
Did I skip an item before us?
Yes.
I did miss. the mess.
5.4.
I have so many notes in front, all over the top of my agenda here, that I'm missing an item. I apologize. 5.4 is the mask usage resolution. The city staff has been discussing additional efforts to reduce the spread of COVID-19. City staff proposed the adoption of 2 resolutions, 1, a temporary employment policy regarding mask usage, 2, a community-wide mask directive. Recommendation is the approval of the proposed mask resolution, adopting the temporary employment policy regarding mask usage, and 2, resolution adopting a community-wide mask directive.
Move approval.
Motion by Alderman Olson for Alderwoman Olson for
Second.
approval, second by Alderman Janser. Discussion on the motion. Any discussion on the motion? Alderman Janser.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Having read through these resolutions and understanding that, many places throughout our community, corporations have made decisions to require masks for their customers as well as their employees. As the university opens this fall, they will be requiring masks as well where social distancing can't be maintained. I think that although there are some people who put forth the argument that either the masks don't work or that they are some kind of an infringement on individual liberty or what have you, I think that it's really not too much to do, not too much of a sacrifice, and these measures are recommended by the highest medical and disease organizations in the land, and so I think I'm able to support this, and I think it's probably a thing that we should do.
Any further discussion? And for anyone that is listening at home or watching this, the full scope of this is also outlined within the resolutions that are attached to the agenda on our website for this meeting. Very easy to find, very easy to follow. I will be supporting this as well, given the nature of what we're also looking at with returning to school, with a variety of different plans regarding what potentially could be a very fluid fall within our school systems too. So, further discussion. Alderwoman Olson.
A question for Mr. Lakefield. Has there been any employee comments related to this?
Mr. Lakefield.
Mr. Mayor, Alderwoman Olson, there has been a great deal of discussion over the last 4 or 5 months since this began on what the best approach would be. One thing that we can be certain is that things will change, and they will change again. I think the consensus was, with anticipation of school coming back on board and what the school districts are doing, what other businesses are doing, this is the common approach, and that we had to have some direction on how we were going to approach this, not only from the staff level, but as a city as well. And we had a committee that agreed to meet to draft this resolution, and there was some considerable discussion on how we were going to make this work, because we have so many different departments that have different working conditions. Some are outside in the heat or in conditions that aren't favorable, or may have emergency situations to deal with, and how are we going to draft a policy that would accommodate all of those? And I think our group did a great job of doing that. And again, this is guidance. Obviously, we want to take it seriously, but I think they did a good job of coming up with a document that is a solid foundation from where we go. And like I said, we'll continue to monitor, what's happening in the community and in the country, and we'll have to make, changes as those develop.
Thank you.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, please call the roll.
Olson?
Yes.
Pittner?
Yes.
Padragula?
Yes.
Ross?
Yes.
Sitma?
Yes.
Evans?
Yes.
Janser?
Yes.
Motion approved. Now we're back to my jumping around here. The 21 preliminary budget question and answer session. We have Mr. Lakefield here. We did have the opportunity to also contact Mr. Lakefield's staff in the finance department with a number of questions over the last couple of weeks. And again, just for the folks at home, I do want to reiterate, there is a significant difference between the final number on the budget of 2020 to 2021. Of course, as the explanation last time we met, significantly between the capital projects that are ongoing between flood control and NAWS, as well as some of the other big capital improvement projects that are not programmed for this year within the queue. However, I did also want to highlight the mill levy remaining very much the same. And also on, if anybody does pull this up at home, I think it's very important that we highlight page 2. The grand total in terms of the budget coming from property tax levy, $25,781,496. That is the proportion that comes from property tax. Our budget this year proposed is $143,513,654. So the vast difference in that is outlined within all of the different grants, whether it be flood control, whether it be NAWS, whether it be NDR and all of those other dollars that we have to account for legally by law. So for folks at home to have that understanding of what monies are generated from property tax compared to where our budget is at. And then also page farther back, and we'll get into this, with our sales tax revenues being projected a little bit lower from last year at $10 million down to 8.5 per penny. I'm hoping I'm not stealing a bunch of your information there, Mr. Lakefield, but just for the folks at home's understanding, Mr. Lakefield, I will turn the rest over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. I apologize, I jumped up ahead of time here, so I probably distracted you. So anxious to talk about our budget numbers, so. I do have a couple of slides here. Oops. A couple of late-breaking updates that have happened in the last week. Of course, we talked briefly earlier about our bond ratings. That's important to us. We worked hard to keep those bond ratings high, and what that does is it's like having it's the city's credit score. So the better rating that we have, the lower cost of borrowing that we have. So that's important. Obviously, there's a number of factors that come into play, some of them financial and many of them also management related. So favorable ratings, we're excited about that. The favorable rates we talked about earlier in the highlight, I just want to point out on the refunding bonds for the airport bonds, the estimate is that that will save us around $2 million over the remaining life of those bonds. So that's important. That's money that would have been gone from the city treasury had we not gone through this effort. So that is $2 million that we were able to save just by going through this exercise. Preliminary sales tax collections, we have preliminary numbers from the League of Cities for August. Those numbers we should see here late this week or early next week. I have a graph here in a slide or two, and it's good news. It's not great, but it's good. So we'll talk about that in just a minute. Crude oil prices continue to tick up a little bit. They were up again a little today for West Texas crude, so we follow that and watch that. And probably the more exciting news is it appears that production is up as well. So we continue to watch that. Obviously, we're still down from the highs we saw pre-pandemic, but we seem to be nudging in the right direction. So that's all positive news. We continue to have an optimistic forecast, but yet try to aggressively and conservatively manage not only a future budget, but the existing budget that we're in as well this year. And we will have for the final budget an updated section on page 10 relating to NAWS. There's some language in there that's a little bit dated, and it doesn't adequately explain what is left to fund with NAWS. So we'll have that updated in the final budget section as well, and we'll try to do a better job of explaining how much longer we anticipate having that second penny sales tax reallocated to NAWS. This is the updated graph with the preliminary numbers for the month of July, kind of right in the middle for July collections. When we look at this, we are right on par with our original budgeted amount for sales tax. think we're actually 0.18% above where we'd anticipate being at this point in the year. So, and definitely ahead of our revised forecast based on $8.5 million per penny. So again, some good news. We did have a few questions submitted ahead of time, so I just wanted to jot those down here a little bit cryptically on the slides. We can get the questions started because that's what we're all waiting for here. So one of the questions were regarding the changes in the amounts for ND-PERS in the budget. And this is a pretty common theme across all of the departments in the city. And there's a couple of reasons for that. The city's defined benefit plan was closed in 2014. So new employees coming on after that date are not allowed to join that pension plan. In the meantime, we had a defined contribution type of plan. And here, a year or so ago, the City Council approved us joining the ND-PERS type of pension plan. And currently, for new employees coming on board, the ND-PERS is the only option that they have. So we continue to see some changes away from the pension as well as the defined contribution plan and moving to ND-PERS. So when you look at the numbers in this budget, the difference with what the other ones went down, ND-PERS went up. So it's just about a wash between them. The next question was surrounding wearing apparel, and there was some differences amongst departments there. Overall, I think citywide, the wearing apparel was actually up as a line item, but several departments had money budgeted in prior years and did not have that funding in the 2021 budget. And some of them were departments where they have some reflective vests or things. I think the assessor's office was one of them that had a small amount in the 2020 budget, but had nothing in 2021. And they just said that they have some on hand. They have a stockpile already. They don't need a bunch of them because they're just going out, and I shouldn't say just going out, but they're going out to assess properties. They're not wear and tear on them like some other departments would be. So there were some differences there. There isn't a conscious effort to eliminate anything as far as uniform allowances or clothing allowances or anything like that. Expert professional advice was a line item that brought up about some questions. This has to do a little bit with how we break out some of these expenditures now with changes to our chart of accounts. The main expenses that we had in this line item, and not to pick on the airport, but they had a couple of big ones in there, and one of the large ones is our how we pay for our parking services up there. We contract that out to a company who manages that, operates that, has all the employees, those types of things. So we have a contract for them. They are an organization that is outside of the city, so this is where that line item falls into. We had some other ones across the board. There's some consultants, different studies that are being conducted, and I think there was a line item that came into this account for our comprehensive plan as well. The next question was surrounding the Minot Air Force Base retention amount and whether that was inclusive of the Task Force 21 funding, and that is correct. That is included in that line item that is labeled as Minot Air Force Base retention. The next line item, and this came in, I think one of the council members received an inquiry by Facebook regarding the breakdown for the community contributions. And this is comprised of what the city pays for First District Health Unit, the Commission on Aging, and also the Service Basin Planning Council. Some of those items are up from last year, in particular First District, and I believe Commission on Aging went up a little bit as well. First District, I talked to their executive director, and she said, hey, we had our funding cut quite a bit 2 years ago. We got some back last year, and we'd like to be at this rate, but this would be a good starting point for us, and that's what we have included in the budget. So they are still not back to where they were 2 or 3 years ago, but definitely with what's going on in the world today, we did include some additional funding for them as well. That is all I have for the preliminary questions or the questions that were submitted ahead of time. So I'd be glad to answer any other questions.
Thank you, Mr. Lakefield. Certainly, there's a tremendous amount of information here, and I know some phone calls have also been made to some other department heads for answers, but this is an opportunity for anyone on the council on any other specific line item or piece of information to gather, to ask the questions. Alderwoman Evans.
What is medical professional services?
Mr. Mayor, Councilwoman Evans, I can look it up, but I believe most of that is prisoner care.
Oh, okay.
For the inmates at county jail.
Okay, thank you.
And one of the questions that I didn't have, that I did have drawn up, and I did not, I kind of overlooked as I was going through mine, under the budget city council section of, that's 14, Mr. Lakefield, and that was under capital infrastructure, falling under city council. It chatted a little bit before that under some of the reorganization of the accounting departments within our new software system. That was that $2,028,104. Previous year, nothing. Did you happen to figure out on the item 49-124?
Mr. Mayor, we did, and that is a transfer from the general fund to the capital projects fund, and that particular amount, I believe, is earmarked for the city hall project.
That's
part of the reorganization. We have to attach departments to some of these things now as well. So city council department was the lucky ones to be the winners for that transfer.
Thank you. And that was my assumption of what that was, given some of the reserves that had been put aside previously. Alderman Janser. Mark, is your microphone on?
Question is, do we have a fair amount of certainty about what health insurance premiums are going to be, or is this an estimate based on kind of what we think, or do we know that for certain?
Mr. Mayor, Alderman Janser, we are anticipating a slight increase in the health insurance, the costs. However, because the city's self-funded in the health insurance plan, we feel we have enough funding in enough money in the fund at this point to absorb any of those additional increases.
Okay, thank you.
Alderwoman Evans.
So several departments, it's a different number, but it's like IT, MTCE, and repair agreements didn't have any cost associated in 2020, but 2021. Is it just because those agreements are coming up for renewal for those departments?
Mr. Mayor, Councilwoman Evans, this is a combination of different things, but mainly because some of those costs are now being allocated out to those departments. So those would have been absorbed in either the IT budget prior to this or in another account. It wasn't broken out specifically to those maintenance agreements.
Okay.
Alderman Janser.
A question on the budgeted amount for the closed pension plan. Usually the actuary recommends a specific amount for our contribution for that. Is that the amount that's included in the budget?
Mr. Mayor, Alderman Janser, that is correct. The actuary goes through and makes a recommendation based on projected payroll for those covered under the pension plan, and that's what we base the estimate for the defined pension contribution. So it's the normal cost or the current cost plus the cost to retire the unfunded liability that the city identified a number of years ago.
Very good, thank you.
That is on page 10 if anyone is specifically looking for the pension plan details, or narrative, I suppose. Would be a better description. Alderwoman Evans.
Very specific question. I don't know if you know this, or we have to pull Lance up. Why are we doing more signs and markers in 2021? Why the increase in the budget for signs and markers? Somebody actually phoned and asked me that, so I said I will ask.
Mr. Mayor and Alderwoman Evans, yes, we are replacing some of the aging signs that we have around town, and the cost for the vinyl and the sheet steel has gone up a little bit.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Welcome.
Alderwoman Olson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I know that you touched on this when you handed the budgets out, but maybe you can kind of revisit the funding of, or partially funding of the retaining wall and fire station and the rationale behind the way that you proposed it.
Mr. Mayor, Councilwoman Olson, we had a number of discussions on how we were going to approach this because we didn't want to pit one project against the other in which one we felt was more important. We approached it by including funding for half of each one of those projects in this budget. And our thought process was if things rebounded sooner than anticipated, we could come back and advance one of those projects. And the alternative was also true, that we didn't want to fund one of the projects and get started and then have the recovery much more delayed than we anticipated and potentially be in a situation where we didn't have all the funding available and we already had a project underway. So we thought this was the alternative for us to, first of all, not have to choose one project over the other. And secondly, it gave us a lot more flexibility depending on what the economic climate looks like going forward. So we have some of the funding identified for both of the projects. If we get partway through the year and we wanted to move one of those forward, we could either come up with an alternative funding source to fund one project over the other or move funding from one project to another as well.
Okay, thank you.
Alderwoman Evans.
So to be clear, I just want the public to hear. So for our city employees, nothing is changing. Like there's no decreases in salary or benefits. They will all, for this budget, they'll all get the step increases as, laid out in their pay scales, I guess. Same contributions the city has been making for their health insurance and other benefits remain the same, or is there any increases? Tell us a bit more about that.
Mr. Mayor, Councilwoman Evans, the pay plan that we have built into the budget includes anniversary dates, which would be their annual, when they come up on their anniversary, they'd move up the step, and as well as career ladders. So if somebody were promoted to a different position and moved up a career ladder, they would get those increases. We didn't build in any market adjustments or cost of living adjustments to the matrix as a whole. And as we discussed in one of the prior meetings, we just felt that market data that we had changed or was no longer accurate based on the changes that were going around in the world and with the pandemic and some of the unemployment and stuff like that was going on. So this was our best guess to have, keep some of the pay plan intact or most of the pay plan intact. And we've, bypassed those market adjustments.
I think for the sake of information, Mr. Lakefield too, and I'm going to reference page 78 here and page 82, and that's essentially what we're talking about on our first penny and second penny of sales tax. Again, 2021 budget is looking at $8.5 million for projections. As we saw in the chart that you showed a minute ago, the up and down roller coaster is almost impossible to try to figure out, especially given the circumstances of 2020 and the uncertainty of 2021. And I just want to revisit for a moment on the second penny specifically, as I've had folks talk about the NAWS project and how long that funding mechanism, and I'm not looking for a definitive answer here, but the question about bonding, if we're tying up that money for 20 years or if this is a cash pay as we go and this is what our anticipation is, just for let's call it a refresher.
Mr. Mayor and members of the council, there are a lot of moving pieces with the NAWS project. We have a lot of construction going on right now, a lot of work in progress. We have some cash on hand, and of course the other component to that is how much we collect in sales tax this year and in 2021 and a few years into the future. If sales tax collections remain somewhere in the neighborhood we're forecasting, we think that we would be ready to reallocate sales tax maybe late 2023, 2024. But there are also some other caveats that come into play here. At one point in the construction of this, the city advance funded a portion of the project, and the understanding is that the state will make up their responsibility of that funding and in a future phase of the project. So that assumes that advance funding is repaid, so to speak, in this time frame in the next 3 or 4 years. If that doesn't happen because of funding limitations at the state, that would prolong how long we would have to reallocate that sales tax. So lots of assumptions made here. Cost of construction is a big part of that, and how some of those big projects, the biota plant has a substantial price tag on it. So it just depends on the cost of construction for that, as well as how the sales tax collections do in the next 3 or 4 years as well.
Thank you, Mr. Lakefield. I know that it's sometimes a very foggy crystal ball, but at least a general overview of, I think, the main components of it help in circumstances like this on why 40% is going here, 18% and so on. So I appreciate that. Any other direct questions or specific questions into line item budgets on the proposed budget? Alderwoman Evans.
Each department, has travel and education costs in there. Is there, and I predict that, with COVID, a lot of our conferences and stuff that we're doing are becoming virtual, and that may, creep with us until 2021. So is there any thought that we need to, move some travel costs, which I'm assuming is travel to these, what would be in-person conferences that may become virtual? Do we have to reallocate some of that to education and training, or would we do a budget amendment? How would that work to give us the flexibility we would need for our employees to be able to still avail themselves of those opportunities?
Mr. Mayor, Alderwoman Evans, you're exactly correct. And in some cases, these trainings have become available by distance online or however that may be. However, some of this training cannot be done remotely. So one of the avenues that they've taken to accommodate that is, instead of us sending a few people someplace, maybe we have an instructor that comes here. So there are lots of different approaches that the department heads have looked at, and this is a bit of a best guess at this point because we're still, potentially 15 or 16 months out from some of this budget being expended. And you're exactly right. If the landscape changes and we need to reevaluate how we do that training, we may have to come back to move some of that funding to make that happen.
Thank you.
Alderman Janser.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I guess I'd like to refer to page 36, and I would like to call out and compliment you and staff on the fact that it looks like street maintenance, road maintenance, and alley maintenance is increasing from about $5.5 million to over $6.1 million by about $625,000. So thank you for getting after some additional maintenance for streets, roads, alleys. Those pieces are important.
Mr. Mayor, Alderman Janser, and to add to that, we also changed how the city used to charge engineering fees on projects, the street maintenance projects, and we've done away with that process. So that would have been about $400,000 that would have come out of this line item and been a revenue line item, so to speak, on the engineering side. So the real difference is about $1 million that we've increased the maintenance budget. So we're hopeful that that's a step in the right direction. Lance says that's about what their capacity is for their staffing. So if we are more aggressive in the future, we might have to revisit that. But we wanted to get to where we think we can handle those projects and get ahead of the curve a little bit on the maintenance.
Very good.
Mr. Lakefield, do we have an overall estimate on what the ND PERS increase, decrease, or level was, the North Dakota Insurance Reserve Fund cost to the city of Minot?
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, I don't have that off the top of my head, but at the risk of Lisa hollering at me, I think our contribution amount actually decreased slightly by going to ND PERS.
Okay. And I misspoke. The Insurance Reserve Fund, NDRF. I apologize. I had followed up here. I was looking at PERS, but thinking NDRF. So on the North Dakota Insurance Reserve Fund, our cost for not only the legal liability, but the other costs associated with that.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, the Insurance Reserve Fund is our liability carrier, and that is based, we're essentially in a pool with other cities and taxing entities in the state of North Dakota. So it's based a lot on, what they have seen as far as losses in the prior years. We did see a substantial increase for the 2020 budget. I believe it was about 15%. And for 2021, do you remember, Sue? About even for 2021.
Thank you. Sorry for the misspoken there acronym. Any other questions for our finance director on the proposed budget? We do have a couple of more opportunities for both questions and answers, as well as information here over the next few weeks. I know that there's a lot of different line items and a lot of different changes on how some of the formularies work simply because of the identifiers. And this is a big change, I think, due in part not only to the accounting, but I think just kind of getting a hold of department that really didn't have anything for personnel anymore, and making sure that those costs are accountable or accurately identified. So I think that helped this process along as well. Alderman Janser.
Page 49. I had a question about this is in the sanitation, and it looks like there's a substantial drop in revenues there. Charges for services, is that, can you illuminate that, please?
Mr. Mayor, Alderman Janser, this is a case where this is actually just broken out. If you look at the top line, there's about a $2.5 million decrease. If you look at the next line down, it's just broken out in different details. So that line item has increased then by about $2.5 million. So the overall difference for the revenue from year to year is actually about $29,000.
So it's really just those accounts are changing in the new accounting system type?
That's correct.
Okay.
I think perhaps too, if folks from the general public or anybody else is asking some of those questions on sharp increases or decreases and things of that matter, there very well could be the case, but in the case, and I'll reference to one of the questions that I had all the way back into that's page 95, the capital flood control, the decrease of $40,805,000. We're programming some of these dollars within stages. I would expect when the Maple diversion comes online, which we hope, and we're crossing our fingers with the Fed when and if they appropriate dollars, that alone could be over $100 million in one budget cycle or two budget cycles. So as flood control goes along, we are going to see some pretty big upticks or maybe decreases if we have a lot of that programming in a single year, and then the year after it falls off. So further questions before we move on? Alderwoman Evans.
Just a comment. I want to thank you, Mr. Lakefield, and your staff and the department heads for really being accessible and answering our questions, particularly, mine being a newbie, have a lot of them. I know it's been a long process. Finance is also going through the whole software change. So it is very is very affirming to be able to reach out to you all and get our answers, and for you to help us with constituents who have questions as well. So thank you to you and your staff and all the city staff who've been helping us navigate through, a process that is a bit painful, not really, but it's, we'll get there. And thank you for helping us get there.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, thank you for that. There are some challenges here just because of the changes to the account structure and those types of things. But our goal is to not make it more confusing, to make it a lot more detailed and informative to everyone in the future. And a lot of these changes will do exactly that. Instead of having what I have up on the screen here is our accounts. And a lot of these used to be lumped into department supplies. So now we have all of these different more detailed accounts, so we can look at what we're spending on paper or all of these different things with some detail. And sometimes there were items that were lumped in there. Our office supplies would be in there, and there might be cutting edges for the blades for the street department in the same account line item. So a lot more detailed, informative, better information helps us make better decisions and answer these questions in a lot more expedient fashion as well. I would like to reiterate, the best questions always come right after the meeting when they pop into your mind. So feel free to reach out to us. We can respond directly. Also, we have the public hearing that will be coming up in September. So we still have lots of opportunities to answer questions.
And for public reference as well, thank you, Dave, and certainly all the staff too. I know there's been a lot of hours that have put into this, so we greatly appreciate that. I would encourage the public for the majority of their questions on the first reading. That's typically where we try to have a lot of that Q&A from the public. Second reading, typically in the past, regardless of what majority of online folks say, typically has been more so for debate among the council. However, I think given the circumstance, if there are a couple of folks that would have some Q&A on second reading, we will entertain that. But I would encourage them on first reading to attend. Okay, any last questions before we move? Thank you, Dave. This is number 7, personal appearances, an opportunity for anyone to come forward and speak on any item that is or isn't on the agenda. I do ask that anybody that does come forward to just state your name and address for the public record, and we'll be more than happy to give you some time at the podium. Seeing none, we will move on to the miscellaneous and discussion items. I don't have anything per se under the miscellaneous and discussion items unless there is something specific. I will only have one item myself just for informational purposes only. We were meant to have a Water Topics Committee meeting here in Minot on Thursday. Was meant to be the entire day meeting for the State Water Commission. Water Topics Tour was to happen Wednesday. That has been canceled. It will not be rescheduled. There was, and without identifying departments or anything else like that, a couple of COVID-19 positive cases that led to the cancellation. So we're going to be working with staff to get a couple of video presentations put together to then submit to the Water Topics Committee and the State Water Commission as far as what the tour would have encompassed to show the flood control progress, not only in Minot, but also in the entire basin with help from the SRJB. So unfortunate, but a sign of the times. I appreciate staff. I know Dan and Ryan put a lot of work into that already, so unfortunately we're not going to have that happen, but we'll get the video put together and make sure the information is at least relayed. Liaison reports. Let's move to number 9 here. Alderman Pittner.
Mayor, I have nothing to report.
Alderman Janser.
Mr. Mayor, the Liaison Committee has not met since our last meeting, so no report.
Thank you. Alderman Ross.
Still with the Ordinance Steering Committee. We're meeting every 2 weeks, and I think we have a meeting coming up tomorrow, or is it Wednesday? And then the All Seasons Arena Committee, we had our quarterly meeting. It was all just basically business as usual with them. So that's my report.
A couple of different committees on MEDC. We've met a couple of times discussing Again, some economic development opportunities that we hope very, very soon are going to be coming back for consideration. Task Force 21, Mark, I'm going to actually defer back to you as our chairman here. I sit on that committee, but Alderman Janser, it's been a unique year with COVID on Task Force.
Yeah, so thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I guess I can just update a little bit. We normally by this time of year are anticipating going to Washington D.C. for our symposium, so this year we have found the necessity to take that virtual, just like most other conferences and symposia have done. And so on September 22nd, we will be doing a virtual triad symposium with a number of speakers that will be pre-recorded, and their content will be posted on the website. We will have, we believe, 3 or 4 live speakers on that day also, to include General Hyten, the Vice Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, Senator Hoeven, and hopefully Secretary Barrett, Secretary of the Air Force. So we're working very hard on putting that recording schedule together, as well as the logistics with the speakers who will be live. So that's kind of the main current project. In the meantime, we've been watching very closely what's going on with the National Defense Authorization Act and the nuclear modernization programs that are funded in that bill, as well as what's going on with the National Nuclear Security Agency as part of the Department of Energy. So there is work to be done in the sense that all of those programs are under attack of one form or another every year, every time the budget is debated. And so getting good information out to the decision makers is really important. And so we try to pay close attention to that, working with our congressional delegation as well as industry partners and other policy advocates. So that's a quick summary of what's been happening.
Thank you, Alderman Janser, and I didn't mean to put you on the spot, but you always seem to have all of this at the forefront of your catalog much quicker than I could on this. But just in reference to the Task Force 21 meeting previously with Secretary of the Air Force and then Chief of Staff had also put together some points of interest for, let's call, improvement or things that we can collectively work on together with Minot Air Force Base to improve life collectively. Continue to have discussions with 5th Bomb Wing Commander Walters up at Minot Air Force Base as they work towards whatever COVID 2020, 2021 looks like, and how we might be collectively as a community and with the Air Force Base able to, I think, identify not only what those opportunities and challenges are, but how we might be able to get together. So those are ongoing conversations just for understanding on that. That is in my liaison report, at least for those activities. Alderwoman Evans.
So most of my meetings are coming up this week, but we did have the NDR convened a group a week or two ago with brokers and lenders to really get an assessment of what their feelings are on the state of single-family housing market in Minot, to see whether or not it is time to perhaps use some NDR money for some single-family homes. So we talked to brokers and lenders, and I think Mr. Zakian will be bringing a proposal to the council, probably in the near future, to discuss the recommendations from the program and the feedback from brokers and lenders on the status of single-family homes in Minot.
Thank you. Alderwoman Olson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The first committee that I serve on, I sound a little bit like a broken record, but it is a census committee. That clock is ticking very quickly to September 30th. So if people have not taken the census, now is the time. We really encourage everyone to take 5 to 10 minutes to complete that census. The money brought into the state for each individual is in the area of $1,900. So if an individual is not counted for 10 years, it's approximately $19,000. So the funding is significant, both at the state and the community level. So please count. I thank all of you. I think many of you were volunteering at census kiosks, and I believe as of about a week ago, we had reached 143 people through those kiosks. So those are likely individuals that did not have access to technology, and we were able to provide that. We will be continuing that through, I believe, the end of September, and I think you're going to get another opportunity to volunteer. The CTE committee, as part of NDR, has been meeting, and we're just trying to make plans for allocation of a building so that we can get this process available, get a CTE online for our community. So we're just continuing to work on that. And I did attend my first Service Basin Planning Commission meeting via Zoom last week, and so I'm kind of getting caught up to date there.
Thank you, Alderwoman Olson. And due to some of their guidelines and changes, I believe either myself or Mr. McMartin from MADC will be joining in on that committee to meet their guidelines. So look forward to that. Alderman Patagula.
As with some of my colleagues, the meetings I had scheduled and my groups had scheduled either had been postponed or will be happening this week. There is another group that I've been asked to be part of, along with Carrie, an employee satisfaction / engagement survey group that the HR department has put together. And I think some very positive and interesting things will be coming out of that in the months ahead, and we'll keep you folks updated. I wanted to also publicly commend Lisa and her staff, the people involved on this work group, for doing some very creative and innovative things to try to get a better handle on how our staff is functioning and improving their functioning. I was very impressed with what I saw, so I wanted to publicly commend them. And like I say, I think there will be some good things coming out of that in the months ahead. On the downside, we may be asking for some additional support, funding-wise or staff-wise, to augment the efforts that are taking place. I think all of us have a recognition that staff are vitally important to our functioning, to our city's functioning, and there are some ways we can enhance their functioning, probably without too much money or extra time. But one of the things we'll be probably coming back to you with at our fall planning meeting, which I hopefully will be scheduled soon, will be a ratification of the council's support for staff development, which is an important thing. And we'll have some very specific kinds of proposals, hopefully by then, and we'll be looking at what are called deliverables, ways by which we can measure whether our ongoing efforts to improve staff retention and engagement are working or not. So some exciting things and very creative things will be happening. And again, very nice to hear and find out about some very good things going on in the HR department.
Thank you, Alderman Patagula. That is the end of our liaison reports. That takes us to number 10, adjournment.
Second.
Motion by Alderman Ross, second by Alderman Pittner. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed, same sign. We're adjourned.